What if you had an eighth day of the week? Not a once in a lifetime perfect day, but one that came around every single week. How would you use it? That is the thought experiment Chris Guillebeau has been sharing, and it gets people rethinking all the invisible rules that shape how we spend our time. In this episode, Chris Guillebeau, bestselling author of The $100 Startup and Time Anxiety, and I explore the stories we've inherited about work, email, and productivity, and how to start rewriting them. By the end, you're going to walk away with practical questions and tools to reclaim your time and design a week that actually works for you.
What have you found? Because I imagine, you've been doing lots of publicity for the book. Which practices seem to have resonated with the most amount of people?
One that people really like, I have been doing a lot of events here in the States. I've been in about 10 cities so far. I'm doing a couple of stops in Canada in a couple of weeks, hopefully beyond North America as well at some point. One of the things people respond to a lot is this idea of the eighth day of the week. And so it's like imagining you have an extra day every week. And what does that look like? And how would you choose to spend this day, which is a recurring day? And so that's the big difference from thinking about like, what is your ideal perfect day? That's kind of a classic like thought exercise, and it can be helpful, but it's also maybe there's some pressure involved with that. It's like my perfect day, like my one perfect day, and if you think about like, what if I had an extra day that came around 52 times a year? Like, how would I spend that? And so that's something that's additive. You could, like, there's a lot you could do. If you had this extra time that came around every week, you could write a book, you could learn a language, you could learn all kinds of other skills. And so people have found that to be kind of interesting. As they think about like freeing up their time, they're also thinking about how would I choose to spend it. And so those two things can kind of work together well. I'm sure there's some others. That's the first one that comes to mind.
Yeah. I liked, and I can't remember the terminology you used, but helping people to unpack what are the assumptions that they have around their time. I'm trying to remember the language that you used around that and really challenging those assumptions around, oh, we do this then, or this is how we spend our time at this point in time. Tell me more about that and help me with remember the language that you use, because I really liked that, thinking about what are the assumptions that I'm operating by.
I think, sure. Yeah, I think I was writing about time rules. This notion of like, we all have rules that kind of govern how we spend our time. And some of this is internalized, like as a child or as a young adult in some of our primary relationships. Like this is like how we spend our time, and this is how things work, and this is what time that meal times are at this time, based on when you are a kid typically, and this is how long it's acceptable to go before you call someone back or message them back, and there are many others, but basically like how we kind of go about our day and spend our time. Most of us have not actually thought about that very intentionally. It's not something that's ever really brought up about like, okay, you're living your life this way because this is what you learned or this is what your parents did. Maybe some of that serves you still, but maybe, you're a different person. It's a different time. It's a different generation, XXX. Like there could be something that might serve you better. So it's helpful to maybe consider like, what are the time rules, that govern my life, and what might be better, for me. And these can kind of coincide with, other life hacks or other things that you do just to try to, have a better life. Like, I'm looking at my phone for an hour before bed. Maybe I should try not doing that, or, I have this belief that we were talking about email, that I must respond to every person, the same day, or I must respond to them at all. Well, maybe that's the case, but maybe not. There could be something else. So I think it's very freeing. It can be very freeing for people once they understand that a lot of how they spend their time is governed by these kind of assumptions that are kind of baked in, and they can go and perhaps rewrite some of those or create something that serves them better.
What are some of your time rules or time assumptions that you have crushed?
What was it, the last part that I have crushed?
Yeah, that you've crushed or questioned. crashed is a bit aggressive. Let's go questioned.
Questioned. I mean, I like crushed depending on the context. So let's see. I mean, I'm sure you've been familiar with this for a while, but I hadn't really known a lot of this research about the limited amount of cognitive attention that we have each day, and it's only a few hours. And I've also found that shifting a little bit as I get older. I do feel like maybe this could be somewhat perception, but I do feel like I used to be able to process or focus a lot more. And so whether that's my perception or reality, I do feel that focus is more limited for me than it used to be 10 years or 20 years ago. And so whatever the case is, I need to be mindful of that. And so this idea that we only have maybe 3 hours a day on average of actual cognitive attention. And this is true, for prolific people throughout history, and, Mozart and Beethoven and all these artists and famous writers and everybody else, like they pretty much got like 3 hours a day. And so I've tried to be really, really careful about, what does that time look like for me and how do I spend it? So I've tried to be careful. That's something I've tried to think a little bit more about.
So how do you then protect those precious focus hours? Do you, I don't know, do you have new rules in place or ways that you think about your day that have helped served you?
I feel like more than protecting them from anybody else, I am the problem. It's me, I'm the problem. I feel like the way that my life is going to be disrupted is much more likely because I fail to take action. I fail to plan or actually use that time well. There's nobody else that's going to take that time away from me. It will only be taken away from me, if I agree to do things in certain hours that I shouldn't do them or whatever. The far greater problem is my own resistance. And so I think the way that I address that is like I always say, the greatest productivity hack is to love what you do. I know that probably sounds very basic and reductive, but if you actually love what you do, it's going to be so much easier to, get up and go and do that thing versus, oh, I have to do this thing. How can I psych myself up? How can I manufacture motivation to do this thing that I have to do? And, it's theoretically possible to do that for a certain amount of time. But wouldn't it be so much better to craft a life or craft at least some projects, some parts of our life around those things that we're really excited about. And then, you feel a lot less resistance to, diving into them and working them. There's still resistance, there's still problems, but honestly, I feel like that solves 80% of the motivation problem. Mm-hmm. What do you think?
Yeah, it's funny. I when I think about time rules, actually, and again, when I was reading the book, I was reflecting on this a lot, and not to bring it back to email, but it's my Achilles heel. And interestingly, I find that for a lot of the, the productivity folk that I have on the podcast, I think of Jake Knapp, for example, who I've had on a few times, and I feel like, email was his Achilles heel, and there have been others. And one of the things that I've been catching myself thinking is that generally, 90% of the time, my phone does not have email on it. So I don't have my email app on my phone, which I think in and of itself is quite unusual. And I do that so that I can't just mindlessly check email whenever I want when I'm on the go. But sometimes I'll need it on my phone, whether it's, I don't know, there's a link to tickets that I bought for a show. And so I'm just I'll just get email on my phone so I can do that easily and frictionlessly. And then it'll stay on my phone for a few days because I'll forget to delete it. And I will experience this sense of stress when I see an email come through, because my brain, whenever it reads an email, and I'm sure this is how most people's brains work, is that they go, I need to respond to that. And then the stress starts because there's something that is on a to-do list that is not yet done. And I think about, what if I hadn't seen that email for 2 days? I wouldn't have had that thought, and I would have just responded at some stage in the future, and that worry wouldn't have been there, or that task taking up space in my mind wouldn't have been there. And I just, I do think about this quite a lot, where just these self-imposed deadlines and assumptions cause us a lot of stress. Whereas if we just didn't see the thing, the stress wouldn't be there, and just how artificial it is. Can you relate to any of this, Chris?
Right. Yeah, 100%. I think it's interesting, two things. One, it's, even if you decide I'm not going to respond until later, that thing is already like in your brain, like you've already taken it in. So it's going to be like, you're going to be thinking about it, or even if you're not thinking about it, you're not thinking about it, and you are thinking about it, right? But also the second thing is like, is it just the notification that's the problem, right? Because if you have the email app on your phone, but you don't have the notifications turned on, then you don't actually see when the new messages are coming in, right? It's accessible to you if you need to go get the tickets for the show or whatever else. But it sounds like in that case, maybe the notification is the problem. I don't
I
know.
don't have my notifications switched on for email. This is me.
Okay. So
Like,
how do you know that
pro-
the email has come through?
because I check it. Because I don't really have social
Because
media
you
on my phone.
okay,
My
all
phone
right.
is quite boring, and so when
Okay.
email is on it, it's like, well, that's an
Okay.
exciting thing. That's going to possibly give me a dopamine
I
hit
see.
if
I
there's
see.
like a good email in there.
I see.
And so
Okay.
it's entirely my
Okay.
own doing, which is
Hmm.
why, like, as many productivity people say, don't rely on willpower. Set up your systems so that you're not relying on
Right. Right.
willpower to not do the thing. And so if email is not on my phone, I don't think about email and I don't check my email.
I kept trying to get better and better at doing these things. And this is part of why I wrote the book. It's like I tried to follow all these rules, right? And these habits about like I shouldn't have this app on my phone, and this is how my notifications need to be set up. And there's 1,000 other things, right? Like we've all read them in like all the books and so on. I guess I was pretty good at it. Like I was pretty good at the productivity game. And at a certain point, I just realized, what am I actually getting better at? Like I'm getting better, like ultimately I think I'm getting better at doing the wrong things, or the more, or even if some of those things can be helpful, like the more I do them, the more things that will come back. And are these things really making a, measurable difference in my life, or are some of them actually stressing me out? It's like the number of questions I get about, even from people who've read the book, because I'm like, the system doesn't matter. You should probably have some kind of list making system and task thing. That's fine, but it doesn't really matter what it is. You should do what's best for you. But still, I'm going on book tour and people are like, tell me a little bit about your productivity setup and your stack and like what apps you use. And I'm like, I'm fine to talk. I don't mind talking about that. But I guess for me, again, that was the problem. Like I thought those things were going to help me or like remedy the distress I felt, and really they did not. And so honestly, the more simple the solution you can find, the better. If there's some productivity tool that requires a lot of learning, then I don't think that's a helpful tool. If you're learning to edit film, if you're learning to code, like these are things in which you need to go and like spend hours maybe watching some courses or YouTube and such, because there is like higher knowledge required there. But for learning like these various systems and such, of keeping up with tasks, it should be very simple. So all that to say, like learning these things and trying to apply all these tools was not helpful to me ultimately.
It's funny. I'm amused by that question because I feel like it mildly misses the point of the book. But then also part of my mind is going, what software does Chris use? What are his
Right.
tools? I don't know. It's got me thinking. But that would just be totally beside the point. I like some of the practices in the book that are more around. Get around like that deeper reflection. And I think one of the questions that you recommend people ask is, what is special about this day? Can you tell me more about like when should we ask that question and why, like what is the impact of doing so?
Yeah, that's good. I haven't thought about that in a long time. What is special about this day? I think I came to that practice out of the belief or the concept that when we think about life, people tend to think about big moments. They tend to think like these milestones of like, here's this thing that happened in my life. And it was like a one-off kind of thing. But really our lives consist much more of like ordinary moments and just the day to day. And a lot of that is unmemorable, or maybe in some ways, like, to make it more active, forgettable. But yet at the same time, like, every day has something, at least one thing, probably more than one thing, that is special. And for me, like, I've tried to work on being more present, on noticing more, on mindfulness. But I also had to come to it from a different perspective, because I'm not really good at meditation, and I've tried some of those practices, and they don't work super well for me. So, but to get to the same place, like noticing what is special about this day, the ordinary moments that make up our life. And there are things we can do to, like, inspire that specialness. There are things we can do to, like, make days special, whether it's a change in routine, or just doing something a little bit different, or asking what matters right now. I also like this one about, did today matter? So you ask this question at the end of the day, like looking back. And it's really interesting, because it's not like asking, was it a good day or a bad day? Like, sometimes you can actually have a bad day, but you feel like you made some progress in something, you spent time with people that you loved, like, you actually felt alive, even though the day was kind of stressful for whatever reason. Or you can have days in which everything was kind of fine, but you look back and you're like, today I'm not really going to ever think about again. And so if you think about, did today matter, and being able to answer, yes, today mattered because of A, B, and C, and those answers might be different for each person, then that's helpful, because then the next day you want to do more of those things. And, hopefully you, like, build up this streak of days that matter to you. So I think all of those things together, it's like pointing towards mindfulness, but maybe a way that's a little bit different from how other people have gotten there.
It's an interesting question. Did today matter? Because I feel like, and I'm going to try this, asking myself that question, certainly at the end of today, and hopefully for a few days. But I feel like I would answer that, well, of course it did, and I would look for the meaning, which would ultimately be a good thing, to reflect on, well, what did matter about today? Because I think as humans, we don't want to go, I've just wasted a day, even though I think a lot of people have that thought at the end of the day. Today felt like, I wasted it. I messed around. I spent too much time on social media or whatever.
Sure. Okay, that's a good point. Yeah, so you could, like, look back and find the meaning in it and find what was special. But maybe here's another way to think of it then. If we think about that pressure, another question is, like, how valuable were my last 40 minutes? And so this is a much shorter time period. And I do think if most people ask that question, there are lots of times during the day that we will say, the last 40 minutes, I don't know that they were that valuable. And so value can also mean productivity. It can mean, like, satisfaction, enjoyment, learning. There's lots of different ways for your time to be valuable. But if you say at any point during the day, actually the last 40 minutes, not that valuable, then you can make a little shift and be like, oh, what do I want to do differently for the next 40 minutes? And so it's not that long of a time that you have wasted, and it gives you a little chance to reset, perhaps.
Yes, I love that question. And I'm curious, how often do you ask yourself that question?
A lot of these kind of activities and practices, I kind of cycle between, and I'll be doing one for a while, and then I'll do something else for a while. For a long time, I was really into the 5 goals thing. Do you know that whole model of, like, you can only have 5 things, and you make a list of your top 25, and then you choose, like, the top 5, and then the other 20 are not things you do on the side. They're things that you absolutely must not do because they're keeping you from your 5. That's a whole, like, other rubric. I was into that for a while, and so every day for like 6 months, I would have, like, a paper journal, and I would write down, like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Like, did I do, but this is not like a lifelong practice. It's something that helped me for a little while, and then I kind of moved on. So when you say, like, this particular one, how often am I doing it? I think I'm probably doing it a couple times a day, but it's not like I have, like, a alarm set up, on my phone. And it's not like I have a journal that it's like I must. That's the old Chris would have like systematized it, and had it, like, I don't know, built some spreadsheet or something for it. Yeah. And thankfully I don't do things like that now.
What other practices, like, because I always love knowing, like, particularly when you've written a book, and I mean, you would have submitted this manuscript 12 months ago or something like that, I imagine. Like, one of the things I'm so curious about, and I feel like I've, experienced when I'm doing publicity for the books that I've written, it's like, gosh, I've either moved on from that or I'm only using a subset of
Uh-huh.
what I wrote about. Like, what are those things, like, right now, in the last few weeks, that you're like, yeah, I'm doing that a
Great
lot,
question.
actually.
Very good question. Well, at the beginning of this conversation, I think we touched on legacy versus living well. That is something that I think about a lot. I try to think about what does living well look like for me at this season. I am very like project focused and like goal oriented, and I'm always going to be that way. Like I haven't given that up. I think I said that too. But I'm often going back to like, okay, what should I be doing right now? Of all the things I could be doing. And then I wrote a good bit about choice and about how life ultimately is about choice and choosing, and there are more things that we want to do than we'll be able to do. Desire is limitless, and there's actually joy in selecting and choice and choosing and making decisions. And so, like, I started writing the book because I felt like there's not enough time. I've already peaked and I've missed my chance or whatever. And like now I'm like, there's still time. There's still time for things that I can do new things, I can change, I can adjust and adapt. And so I think that is something that is very much with me. I know that sounds kind of big picture, but it actually really does inform like my day to day and think about what is it that I want to work on. I just put on a new event a couple months ago in Austin, Texas, for the neurodivergent community. And like I used to produce another annual event. I did it for 10 years with David Fugate, our mutual friend and literary agent. And, we built that event up year after year, and then it came to a natural end. And so I wanted to start this new event. And so to make a long story short, I did it, and it went really well. And it was for a relatively small number of people. There were just like a couple hundred people there. And it took several months of like full-time work. So on the scale of like, like from like a hard business analysis, like, is this the best thing for me to be doing? Maybe somebody would say no, but I'm like, this is absolutely what I should be doing. Like, it was totally the right thing. I'm excited about, building it more for a year or two. So maybe just thinking about what really matters and how do I apply that is something that I try to do.
Have you changed, since writing Time Anxiety, like your process of thinking about what projects you do take on versus what you say no to or get left on the cutting room floor?
I don't know if the process has changed so much as I no longer feel bad or not as bad about the things I'm not doing or the things that I'm not great at. I have a lot of friends who are really good at social media, and they're just crushing that, and they're building all these profiles and like new videos and reels every day. It's just so great to watch. And I used to feel very envious of it, and now I just feel like, maybe I feel like 10% envious of it, but it's more just like, that's what they do. They're really good at that. That's not me. There's other things I'm going to do. So I don't know if it's the process that's changed. It's more the FOMO has decreased. So that's good.
That's awesome. Well, Chris, how useful has the last 40 minutes been for you? Has it been a good use of your time? Longer than 40 minutes we've recorded for.
I really love this conversation. You have asked some really smart questions. You actually read the book, I can tell. And you are someone who's worked in this field for years. I have a lot of respect for you. It has been a wonderful conversation and a wonderful use of 40 plus minutes.
Thank you so much for watching. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what's coming out next on How I Work.